like the same thing when you're learning how to walk when you're a child. Like, you don't just get up and start running. You fall, you stumble, you smash your head on the table, and life is no different than the process that you did to just learn how to walk. Business is the same way. So it's imperative, because those days that are hard, if you do not give yourself permission, those hard days will keep you stuck, and they'll keep you exposed and very vulnerable.
Designed to encourage, empower, and educate real estate professionals by sharing best practices from business leaders that are proven winners. I'm your host, Kyle Malnati, and this is Calibrate Real Estate. Broadcasting from the Mile High City, thank you for tuning in to the Calibrate Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Malnati, and we are here to encourage, empower, and educate real estate professionals around the world. As you know, we'd love a 5-star review. So if you have a moment to do that, please click a 5-star review on Apple iTunes. I'm with Andy Dane Carter today. Andy Dane Carter is the host of the Bulletproof Real Estate Podcast and is about to launch the Unlock Now podcast to talk about other things besides real estate. But Andy is a husband and a father. He also is an author and a professional speaker. And what I love most about Andy Dane Carter is he's a real estate investor. So we're going to talk about a lot of different things today. Andy, thank you so much for joining us.
100%. Thanks for having me.
Well, you're welcome. Here we go. Let's dive right into it. I'd like to talk about a couple of your podcast topics that I found very interesting to me. So I was listening to you in the most recent podcast, the Are You New? And something that you may not know about me is, even though I've been a real estate professional for 15 years now, I'm a broker owner for just 2 years. So I started my real estate firm in November of 2016. We are about a week from our second anniversary. And I'll tell you what, it is hard. It is very hard leading and managing others. You know, I was a really top producer in my industry for a long period of time. And I decided I was going to create a brand that was going to be special and different. And man, it comes with so many different, I would say, just potholes and pitfalls that I wasn't expecting. So I liked how you said it's important to give yourself permission to be new, and that you should master level 1 before you focus on getting to level 2, 3, 4, et cetera. So what does that mean to you? For the folks who haven't listened to episode 55 of your podcast, Are You New? What does it mean to mastering that first level and the permission to be new?
Yeah, it's a extremely good question that I have to constantly remind myself that you have permission to be new. And it's something that I say all the time, that everybody sucks in the beginning. I don't care who you look up to, who is the greatest athlete of all time, the most talented, whatever. They all started really bad in the beginning. So I like to forget that. So I have to remind myself, like, okay, this is a brand new chapter of your life. I don't care if it's your kids, if it's business, if it's health, if it's like, okay, this is going to be hard until I get good at it. And then it's going to be fun, and then I'm going to master it. But those are processes. And those processes can be extremely painful physically and emotionally, especially going from like top producer in the space of real estate to now boss broker, that all you do is deal with fires all day. There's a lot less of the like high fives and we close that deal. It's more of the like 90-10 fires to high fives. So it's been extremely fun for me to do that process. I've had some really, really good friends. It was hard for them to actually make that shift, to go from like crazy top producer to broker owner. And they went through some like crazy pains with those processes. And it's just like the same thing when you're learning how to walk when you're a child. Like, you don't just get up and start running. You fall, you stumble, you smash your head on the table, and life is no different than the process that you did to just learn how to walk. Business is the same way. So it's imperative, because those days that are hard, if you do not give yourself permission, those hard days will keep you stuck, and they'll keep you exposed and very vulnerable.
So a follow-up question that I have to that, and having listened to your podcast, I know that you are, and you mentioned a personal example of your 3-year-old son wakes you up because he's having a nightmare, and you're starting the day at a different time than you're expecting, and you're grouchy or you're grumpy, and you're like, wait a second, I haven't done my meditative practice yet. And it's because I got kind of thrown off kilter. And so I would say for me, I know personally, in those hard days, you've got to have a couple of processes, as you call them, of things that can kind of get you back to center. And some of it can be your spiritual walk, your meditative practice, but others can be just little things that help you get unstuck. I've got a few of those, but what are some of the things that you've learned through coaching others? And we'll talk about your Unlock Now program, but what are some of these things that you've learned in the process of getting unstuck and realizing that, hey, today may have not worked out, or I'm in the middle of something that's tough? How do you get out of that?
That's an incredible question as well. So it's completely different for each person, but there are some stuff and some things that have really helped me over the years. And a humongous part of that is meditation. And I have these things that I call non-negotiables. And my non-negotiable, as soon as I wake up in the morning, is my 10-minute meditation. So I sit in meditation and I sit in quiet for 10 minutes. And sometimes that turns into like a prayer, or sometimes that's just me just really getting calm and creating space so I have the capacity to do the next step. And the next step is to sit in gratitude for 5 minutes. So I sit in gratitude. So that sets the tone for my day. So many people love to wake up and grab their phone, and then they let the rest of the world literally dictate how they're going to feel for the rest of the day. When I do it the opposite. So from the nice, quiet 5 minutes of gratitude, then I work out. And then I eat something really healthy, and then I spend time with my children and family. So those are my non-negotiables. And then I turn my phone on from airplane mode. So I'm in control of my whole entire day, because as you know, in the space of real estate, there's things that are very much that are not in your control are going to come at you on fire. So I like to create as much space as I can, because I know that's coming. Somewhere in the day, I'm going to get knocked sideways. So, and I can always feel if I missed one of my non-negotiables, if I missed a workout, or if I missed, I love to drink green smoothies in the morning. I put all kinds of stuff in there, and I can just tell if I missed something. So for me, it's wildly important.
Well, and I know this from having heard some of your podcasts, that you are a big proponent of the little things, and you talk about those non-negotiables. Those little things could be not having enough water throughout the day prior, and you wake up feeling dehydrated. And I think that focusing on the little things often leads to the big things. And I really enjoyed how you were talking about that in your podcast 54, Do the Little Things. And that transitioned into some things that can really sideline a top producer. And it's things like relational issues, that because you're focused on fighting fires for people all day long, you come home and, you're just spent, you're beat up and chewed up and spit out, and all of a sudden you're not the best person you can be at home. And you talked about that there's a stat that over 90% of divorces, the root cause is the lack of appreciation, and just these little things you can do throughout the day. And you talked about hanging out with your family, but also making sure that you're right before you're hanging out with your family. And I would imagine that meditative practice, that prayer time, and then that workout time probably all happens pretty early in the day, to make sure that those are successful for you to have the rest of the day be maybe what other people need you to do. So when do you wake up, and what does it look like in your first hour of the day as you're hitting your 10-minute meditation, your 5 minutes of gratitude, and then your workout, and then how does the rest of your life kind of unfold as we're unpacking that real specifically?
So for example, this morning, my little 3-year-old had a nightmare. So he was up at 3 o'clock in the morning. So this morning, my day started at 3. And I finally got him back down. So between like 3:10 and like 4:15 was my like sacred time and my quiet time, where I can just really get focused. But that's usually just for the morning part. I have meditation like zone in my office. I have meditation pillows. I have all these things that I have at home at my office. It's a very soft feel at the office because there are times I need to come into my office, close the door, scream into one of the pillows, and then sit in meditation and try to recenter. So, because it's wildly important to me, because I have a massive amount of responsibility for a lot of people's money, and I take it very seriously. So I literally owe it to them to be at my highest and best use all day. So sometimes it goes sideways and I will drive to the office mad, and then I'll get calm at the office to keep going. And the same is like, it's the exact same philosophy. It's about like 2:45 and I'm all worked up over something. I need to get calm again before I hop in my car to go home to family, because it's really important that I'm not bringing all of that baggage from work home. It's hard to not do it. I'm just way more mindful of it now. I just did a show with Elena and Grant Cardone, and we like dove very, very deep into this topic, because like there's days that he comes home and like stuff is burning at work. And she's like, I have to just give him space to let him kind of do his thing so he can have his process. We all have our processes, how we get things going. And you just need to be mindful of them, because then my wife knows. She's like, nope, turn around, come back in an hour. You know, but like, not because she's mad at me, because she knows that she's going to get about 20% of her husband and probably 80% of like mad dad that has that. So it's important because it's not just about the commas and the zeros for me.
I love that you are okay with saying that, you know what, it's going to be really stressful. And you figured out ways to get through that. It's not that the stress isn't going to be there. It's not that the responsibility is not going to be there. It's always there. It's just a question of how you get through it and create good space. And I love how you literally physically have the space in your office or at your home where you can have a moment to say, look, I need to chill out. I need to chill out for just a second. And I'm going to do that through X amount of steps. I love that your wife, it sounds like the two of you know each other really well. And in that podcast, Do the Little Things, you talked about the 5 love languages, which I love that book by Gary Chapman. Amazing book. And you mentioned it's not just for a relationship, but let's go the relationship route first, the romantic relationship route of it. For those of you who haven't read the 5 love languages, it was done decades ago by a psychologist named Gary Chapman. And it talks about 5 different methods that people both show love, but then also receive it. So a lot of times people show love the way that they want to receive it. So those ways are acts of services, like doing things for people, quality time, spending time with someone, words of affirmation, saying a compliment to someone that's genuine, gift giving, that's pretty simple, giving a present or doing something that someone wouldn't be able to do for themselves in the form of a gift, and then physical touch. And, you know, for the relationship side, we know what that means from an intimacy standpoint, but just, you can have physical touch with someone at the office by giving them a high five or slapping them on the back and just saying, hey, great job, or giving, you know, knuckles. So it doesn't always just have to be relationship oriented. And you had mentioned, which I find real interesting because my wife is the same way, you had mentioned that your wife is very acts of service and quality time, that's important to her. My wife, Courtney, same thing. And so for me, if I'm a words of affirmation guy, which I heard you say that you are. So if I'm giving her tons of compliments and I'm getting home late every single night, based on our prearranged time that is acceptable for me to get home. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But if I am sitting on the couch, but I'm saying, you know, all the nice things that I need to say about her, but I'm not doing some yard work every now and again or helping out around the house, she's going to be bent out of shape because I'm not loving her the way she needs to be loved. So let's talk about the love languages and some EQ type of stuff, not IQ stuff, but EQ stuff of this. How do you handle people's egos, both in the workplace and then at home? So let's talk about relationship at home first, and then also in the workplace and how you implement the 5 love languages.
Sure. Fantastic question. I love this book. And this book was a non-negotiable for my wife and I to read together before we got married. I was like, honey, listen, I'm going to tell you exactly what I am. And I already know what you are, but we're going to read this together because it's really important to me. And for me, I'm like 80% words of affirmation. And I've told my wife, I'm like, if you tell me you're proud of me and I'm doing a good job, I'll build you an empire. I'm super simple. But for her, she's all about like quality time. And that's why it's so important for me to leave work at work, because she wants me to be focused on her and the kids and family, not something else, which I completely understand. But a huge part of that is you have to get your mind right, and you really have to get what's important to you right. So it's as simple as breathing sometimes. And I talked about space. So I've got a very definitive space at home where I can get calm. Same with the office. But my car, I spend so much time in my car because I'm driving around looking at real estate and deals, that my car has become a very like sacred place for me as well. I literally have breathe that is tattooed in 7 different languages, all like here on my arm. I used to suffer from like crazy panic attacks and anxiety. And so one day I was in yoga and I just got this vision of breathe. And as soon as it was tattooed on me, I started to slowly kind of calm down. But just breathing will calm your state, or it'll fire you up. So like there's times where I'll get all fired up in the car because that's what I need to go into a meeting. I don't need to be calm. I need fire. So I create the fire to go into the meeting, and then I calm back down after I get back in the car. So for my wife and I, it's important that we like am very self-aware enough where we understand what we're doing. Because what a lot of couples will do is they'll actually use that as leverage against their partner. It's like, okay, you're really mad at me right now, so now I'm not going to give you what's going to make you happy. So you can use it for good or you can use it for evil, which I've kind of seen over the years from couples. But it's very simple with her. If I'm home and I'm very present, she's very happy, which leads to words of affirmation for me because she's happy. It leads to physical touch with my wife. And you're absolutely correct. Physical touch does not have to be just from husband and wife. It's those little things, but you have to know what somebody's all about. There are people, if you give them a high five at work and you tell them they did a great job, they're good for a month. You just have to really, really know what that is. And as far as ego goes, that's something I work on deeply with people. I've done a whole lot of ego work in my life, and it's constantly getting put back in the corner until I need it.
I love that you queued up ego. We didn't talk about this, but my favorite quote from one of your recent podcasts was that if you can't manage your emotions, you don't have a chance managing someone else's. And that you talked about how that ego, it is there. You know, I'm a big person of faith. I believe God gave us an ego to protect ourselves, right? But sometimes what happens, and you had mentioned this, that you can hear that ego coming out and you're like, whoa, that was 90% ego in that statement that I said there. And so I'll let you talk through that. But I just love that comment of if you can't manage your emotions, you don't have a chance of managing someone else's or even leading someone else. And so let's talk about leadership and ego. And I love the book title. I haven't read it yet, so I can't recommend it, but Simon Sinek's book, Leaders Eat Last. I love that title because it's all about putting others in front of you. So let's talk about that, leading others and ego and what that means to you.
It's extremely important to me because I struggled with it a lot when I was, probably like in my early 20s. I was so confused that it was so important for me to put this thing in front of me. And I used to mask it. I'm like, it's not my ego. I'm just very confident. Nope, ego. It was totally my ego. Your ego is literally given to you by God to protect you. And that's a beautiful thing. But it can be used really poorly as well. And for me, you really have to keep your ego in check to lead, because I'm not always right. I don't always have the best plan or the best decision, or this is not like, it's been so fun for me to build and scale these companies because I bring people in and they can't believe that I'm extremely open. I'm like, what do you think? And they're like, me? I'm like, yeah, what do you think? Because I don't pretend like I have all the answers, and I'm never going to. So for me, it's important to lead from the front and not be the boss behind the desk and saying, here's what you need to do, here's what you need to do. And the first way for me to lead from the front is to lead myself by example. So if I'm a poor example to myself, I have no business leading anybody else.
We are such kindred spirits. I will tell you what, I have always felt like I've been the best leader when leading by example. And the times that I get out of sync with my leadership, it absolutely is when I'm trying to postulate about something or opine about something that I haven't done. And so that's just something I've learned about myself, that leading from example is far superior for me. Now, others, real intellects, they can study something and say, hey, look, this is how it's supposed to be. But I also love how you just ask that natural question of, what do you think? And you're engaging that person in a conversation instead of beating them over the head with the policy of the way it should be. And I'm entering into a meeting after this discussion where I need to remind myself that we're going to talk about stuff, that these are really important business leaders within my company. You know, I may own the company, but these are very important people, and they have a say in what happens. Because if I make it completely about me, at some point they'll be gone. And if they're important people to me, I need to realize that they have a side of the coin to think about, and I need to make sure I get their perspective. And so I love the idea of lead from the front and asking that question of, what do you think? It reminds me of my pastor, who constantly reminds us in the congregation that, look, a shepherd leads from the front, the sheep follow the shepherd. A cowboy leads from the back and cracks a whip, and the cattle are forced to go wherever. And so, you know, if you're from the back and you're not leading by example and stepping forward, it's that's something that is a recipe for disaster. And I love that concept of, are you a shepherd or are you a cowboy? And I think sometimes the maverick in us, that ego, can say, hey, I'm going to crack the whip from the back, and it's not going to make anybody feel good about it. The next question that I have for you is that short-term thinking versus long-term thinking. And in an episode that you titled The Long Game, you talk about a lot of people get overly focused on short-term thinking and or become attached to short-term metrics. So this perfectly dovetails in what we were just talking about with leadership, that, you know, if you're making a conversation that you want to win instead of listen and really learn, you can think about the short term if you're focused on winning a conversation. So let's talk about that. And you had said that you are always focused on, how do I bring this person the most value and really hook them up? So let's talk about your thoughts around short term versus long term thinking and winning in business long term.
Yeah, no, it's a super good question for a whole lot of reasons, but there's a saying that I say a lot, and it's, do you want to be right, or do you want to get what you want? And it's kind of like the same thing. Do you want to win, or do you want to get what you want? And those are, I literally have these conversations with my wife, with my business partners, with employees, with like people at the post office, with my children. It's all these things that are like, do you want to win? Do you want to be right, or do you want to get what you want? So for me, it's this constant shift of thinking, where it's, especially in the space of real estate, where people get so caught up in the short-term metrics of the deal and the commission, they will sometimes dramatically jeopardize their integrity to the investor or to their client, and I can smell it a mile away. And the problem with that is you are exposed now. Now you're exposed for a little more of your truth, because your truth is not really lining up to what's coming out of your mouth. So I like to look at what's happening, and do you truly have my best interest, or is it your best interest? And I can usually tell pretty quick. And hey, that's okay. Like, this is your job. You do this for a living. You're trying to get some commissions. But when you have my back, now I want to pull you in. Now I want to do 9 deals with you a month, not 1, and I never talk to you again. So for me, those short-term, it's just short-term thinking. Like, everything I do is for the long game. Every piece of real estate that I buy, I'm hopefully, knock on wood, never going to sell. And all my relationships have all been created on, I over-deliver value to them first before I ever ask for anything in return.
Well, I love that, because there's this concept that, you know, hey, the deal in front of me is the one that I got to push through. And what you might be doing is you might be sacrificing that relationship and lose out on the next 10 deals. And there's been plenty of times as a commission salesperson where I've looked at it and said, what's the right thing to do here? Taking myself out of the scenario, do they deserve this property, et cetera? And if I can sacrifice a little bit on fees, sometimes that ends up unlocking a relationship that's long-term. I've got a great example of that right now as a real estate professional. So I sold a building to a client that I have listed again today. This is over 5 years ago. And we were in a tough negotiation, not because he's a tough person, but we were just stuck. We've got this gap to bridge. And often that gap in real estate commissions, we love to say we're a fee apart, because magically it seems to be that 3 to 6%, whatever it is, all of a sudden we're a fee apart. And so I took a bold step and I've done this multiple times. This is just one scenario where I said, hey, I'm going to really dig in deep and I'm going to basically offer a concession on my commission because I think this is the right building for you. And it was a big apartment building. And it was a time that I really needed the sale and I would have loved the full commission. So fast forward, that person listed their building for sale. We're under contract. We're going to do 2 1031 exchanges into some other properties. And I have the ability now to do 4 deals instead of just 1. I may have lost out on that deal in the first place. And so that long game is really important to focus on. And I loved how you said in that podcast you were recording that there's lots of good deals out there. And for the folks that feel like, hey, look, this is just about getting a deal done and I'm not going to adjust my comp structure, might be the way to look at it. You had shared the idea that, look, there's a lot of brokers out there and there's a lot of people that can come into real estate brokerage really quickly. And it's a very low barrier to entry business. And where you stand as a real estate investor, it takes a long time and requires a lot of good relationship. So let's talk about that concept of there's a lot of good deals out there and what happens when someone burns a bridge for you personally.
Yeah, so I have a long list of people that are on the blacklist. And I have a very short list of the people that are not on the naughty list, we'll call it. And I mean, it's a huge difference. So the people that are on the blacklist, I've usually done 1 to 2, 3 tops with, and usually the third one was like, that's it, never again. These people, they literally only care about their money, and they don't really have my back. Now, the people that are on the good list have made hundreds of thousands, if not millions, just in commissions and just in deals that like we've been able to do together, because it's a relationship. Like my entire net worth is based on my network and based on me just doing the right thing, deal after deal, year after year, so they can trust me. But if I can't trust you, it's really hard for me to believe anything you say when it comes to doing all the different things in real estate that move, like lots of due diligence. It's like, well, are you being truthful? Most people aren't in our business, so I have to dig even deeper. So there's a very small list of like key star players, but they've all been like completely changed and their lives are very different because they made a hard decision way back in the beginning.
I love that. So one of the things that we talk about a lot of times in our interviews is the beginning of your career. And I used to ask that question right at the beginning. And the more I thought about it, let's dive into some stuff that you already know and people need to hear about. But I'd love to hear how you got your start. For a lot of real estate professionals that are listening, we broker dozens, if not hundreds of sides of transactions every year. And I'm so surprised at how many real estate agents don't invest in real estate. I've been on the multifamily side of the business for a long time, and I help people buy and sell investment properties. And I love talking about retirement, putting your kids through college, and establishing a legacy for future generations. So how did you get that bug? How did you decide to invest in real estate, and kind of what were you doing before you started investing in real estate?
That is a long answer. So for me, it was a long time coming of being just really tired. So like there's a lot that I've done in my life. I've been literally working since I was 12. I've built, bought, and sold all kinds of businesses and restaurants. At 21, I was one of the youngest wine sommeliers in the country, so I got super into that. And then I worked for a huge corporation for a very short period of time that was not a good fit for me as an entrepreneur, let's just put it that way. And then that literally almost killed me. I was working way too hard. I was like 60 pounds overweight, and I was burning the candle at both ends and wildly unhappy. So, and I was drinking like a fish, which was really bad. So I hit pause, and I had just enough money in the bank to hit pause for a long time if I wanted to. So I literally went back to my old philosophies, which is, I'm not happy. Let's get out of this problem. So I gave myself permission to not work for 30 days. I'm not going to work for 30 days. I'm just going to get healthy. I'm going to eat healthy, and I'm going to do smoothies and all that stuff. I felt so good on day like 32. I was like, okay, 2 months. I'm just going to do this. I'm just going to stay down this path of health. And I was a different human being by the third month. I'd lost a bunch of weight. My head was really clear. I knew exactly where I was going in life, kind of. What I knew I wanted to do was not go back to anything corporate. I knew I had to stay with my, I have very much entrepreneurial DNA. I have zero business being in the entire corporate world, but I got really healthy. So I took a year and a half off. I became a certified teacher of yoga. So I started to teach yoga, and I was racing triathlons. I was trying to go from being a new triathlete to a professional athlete in 1 year. And I got close. I almost did it. But then I got really broke. So I burned up all my money, and then I was literally forced with this, okay, so do I go back into corporate America? And I was just offered a huge job with a ridiculous salary, but I was going to have to go back into corporate and run a sales team. I was like, I just can't do it. And a really close friend of mine, he was flipping tons of houses. He's like, why don't you try real estate? You're a smart guy. And so I was sitting in my backyard, had a huge bonfire. I was in a deep meditation and did a long prayer. And it just came out as like, do real estate. And so that was the voice that I heard and was like, okay, I'm going to give it a shot. But I knew from the beginning, I was always going to be an investor or work with investors. So as soon as I got my license, I went straight to working with investors.
Well, I love that. And investors are an interesting bunch because it's kind of like trying to nail Jello to a tree. Investors are wild mavericks, and they've become investors because they're very successful. And I find that working in the space with real estate investors is very interesting because every single person I interact with is a business owner. They may own a business that operates 2 units in a duplex, or they may own a business that operates 5 apartment buildings that are all 20 units in size, and they've got a management company that they're managing, or they've got a staff that they're running. And it's just really cool to see real estate investors on their journey. And so what were the first couple of deals you did as a real estate investor? And now what does it look like for Andy Dane Carter now that you've been coaching people to do this, and you do different discussions on real estate investing? What was the first couple of deals you did, and then what does it look like now?
So the first deal that I did, I literally put like every penny I had, and I partnered with these 3 guys, and I got like 7% of it. I put in like, I think like $70-something thousand, and I got this little sliver of the deal. But I was excited because I'm like, I'm in. I finally got a piece of a building. And it's just interesting how this whole thing works. So when I first got straight to real estate, I had about $400 left in my bank. And so the first month I did 0. And then the second month I closed 1 deal, and I made, I think it was like $2,500. It was like a little just kind of like wholesale, thing. And then the third month I closed my first deal with them, and I got paid 10 grand. I was like, well, I could get used to this. And then everything shifted in my mind, and I was really good on the phones. I was really good with brokers and agents, and I was really good at short sales and REOs. Well, if you remember in 2008 and 9, if you could do those really well, you were very successful. So we changed the entire firm to do those instead of driving to the auction and paying cash every morning. So the third month I made $50,000 and have never looked back since. So it's been a cool journey for me because in the beginning I didn't have that much capital. So I literally had to find these deals that had so much equity that they would give me a piece or the deal wouldn't go to that investor. And I slowly worked out this whole thing and list and program, and it became extremely successful. And that's what I coach a lot of people on now, is to how to be a legitimate wholesaler, not a wholesale shyster, but create a legitimate wholesale business that work with legitimate investors. That's a very different conversation than what's being talked about on the internet nowadays.
All right, so let's talk about your book launch. I recently heard you talk about an event that you were doing in LA maybe a year or so ago, where you had a number of RSVPs. The list was over 100 people and you were super excited about it. Your book was just coming out. And when you get there, what did the room look like?
There was a lot of chairs and not a lot of bodies. There was 13 people that showed up.
Uh-oh.
Food, I had wine, I had there was a huge, step and repeat for photos. I mean, I had it all. And that's not what happened. So there was two ways for me to look at it. One, it was a failure and I didn't do it, or I cut the room in half. I put the chairs in a semicircle and we got real close and real intimate, and we had an incredible, incredible evening where there was people there that I'm literally working with now that it's been so impactful for them in their lives. And so it was this thing where that's what was supposed to happen. It was supposed to be small so it could be nice and intimate. And at the same time, that if 1,000 people would have showed up, I probably would have somehow figured it out, but I was not prepared for that. I'm extremely prepared for it now, but that's the part about you have to have a certain amount of capacity. But I was just excited because the book was coming out, and it's so important for people to read because it's multifamily stuff that can help you if you're poor. A lot of people that are poor don't know if they save up $3,000, they can buy a duplex. And that's what I help a lot of people with all through the Midwest. It's you're paying $600 a month rent and you're living in a $45,000 duplex. Let's do the math. And they'll be in tears. I'm you're third generation renter. You can empower yourself to change that behavior. You can buy a fourplex or a duplex, put down $4,000, and now the person that's living right across the wall from you is covering almost the entire mortgage. That will change the way you sleep.
I love it. And that empowerment is something that we are all about here. And I would just say that what I learned from you in hearing that is something that I've been told throughout my life, is that, and John C. Maxwell is famous for writing a book called Failing Forward, but a lot of people get bent out of shape when they have a failure. And the perception could have been you had all these RSVPs at this event and only a dozen people show up. And what you did there is you pivoted. You said, hey, look, these are the people who are supposed to be here. There's an old adage that when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And for you at that time in that space, your audience was 13 people. That's a heck of a lot more people than some others have listening to them, right? And I think it's really important that you could recognize that and say, okay, we're going to pivot this. We're going to make it more intimate. We're going to have this Q&A discussion instead of me kind of being on a soapbox and doing a typical platform style speech. So I love that you learned from that. What are some other failures in your life that you feel like you've really learned from, and think like a scientist and say, look, okay, this was an experiment that didn't go the way I thought it was. So there's learning here. Instead of getting bent out of shape and wearing that failure personally, how did you progress through that failure?
Sure. I've had hundreds of thousands of failures, and they continue today and will continue for my whole life. There's this beautiful thing called course correction that I discovered about 3 years ago, and it changed my life. So there are so many failures that they're all stacked up. I've failed in relationships. I failed in my body. I failed in my spiritual path. I've failed in business. So there are a ton of them, and I usually learn the same things from them all. There is a definitive, defined path for me. And as long as I stay on the path and I stay in the light, things are usually amazing. once I get out of my own way. And a big part of that is course correction. And there are these crazy goals that I set for myself every 90 days. My entire life is broke down into 90-day challenges on top of each other. And it's a way for me to collapse time and build some, huge things really quickly. But it's the same for all these different areas. I have a 90-day challenge for my body, a 90-day challenge for my spiritual path, a 90-day challenge for business and for my kids and everything else. So like I fail every day. I don't ever learn from my wins, except for that, like, it feels great to win. That feels incredible. That's an awesome emotion. But I learn from my failures. I don't learn from the wins. So I love to course correct because I set these targets and goals. And if something happens, it's told me I don't have to stop. I can just move a little bit to the left and keep going. Or I have to move to the right and then crawl and then roll instead of run. But I'm still moving. And that's the part where so many people get stuck and then stay there.
Again, we're kindred spirits because I named my company Calibrate Real Estate a couple of years ago, not just because it rhymes, but because the word calibrate was something I was becoming familiar with. And when you think about a calibrated measurement, you think about a scientific tool, you think about just your Xerox machine in the office. When it's out of whack, you bring someone in to calibrate it, to bring it back to center. And the best example that I've heard of this is Jim Collins, author of Good to Great, Great by Choice, so many different books. And Jim talks about in his book, Great by Choice, a calibrated line of sight. And those who've listened to the podcast have heard me talk about it. But it's the idea that, you know what, if you've got a limited amount of gunpowder and you're in a ship and an enemy ship's approaching you, what do? Do you just load your cannon with as much gunpowder and a cannonball? And most people do that, and the cannonball goes sailing past the ship. Or maybe you could do this. You could take your smaller guns, pack a little bit of gunpowder, and take these smaller, educated, little risks, and maybe have little failure. But as you're having failure, you're getting closer and closer and closer until you hear ping, the side of the enemy ship's hull. Then you pack your guns, your big cannons, and you fire that cannonball, battleship sunk. So calibrate for me is really important because it's this journey of not taking failure personally and thinking about it like a scientist, intentionally course correcting and iterating. And I think that's very important for self-development. And I would imagine for you as a coach, that's really, really important to get people past. So how do you do that with someone? If you're coaching them and you're saying, you know what, look, didn't work out the way that you wanted. How do you get someone past that failure? Because it's emotional. It's hard. When you have something that's a really deep failure, it's a hard thing to get past. So as you've talked to someone and consulted with them, how do you get them past that concept of it's okay, there's learning in this failure?
Yeah, it's a crazy process, and it's very singular and very personal to them. So I'm very mindful of, look, this is a place that they probably don't want to go, but they need to go there. So how do I hold space so they feel safe enough to really talk to me about it? And that comes with trust. So first I have to get their trust, and then I have to let them know that this is the safe place for you to talk. And we're going to get to where you want to go, but you have to trust my process. And my process has been proven for me and a lot of other people. So I'm just going to roll with it. And I usually just start asking questions, and I listen. I'm an incredible listener. I got super blessed and lucky with that. I get everything I'll ever need to know by listening. And so we start the process, and I can usually figure out pretty quickly, is this a problem with ego? Is this the problem with self-esteem? Is this the problem with you're not playing to your full potential, or you're stuck in somebody else's story? Those are your parents' stories and you're just wrapped up in them. That's not even your truth. So it takes a little while to sift through that stuff. But as soon as I get to the truth, it's this crazy thing just opens up, and it's like an aha moment. It's usually very, very emotional. And it's cool, now we're here. Let's just sit in this for a minute. This is really who you are. You may have gone your entire life thinking that this is who I am, and then I'll shatter all of that. This is perfectly fine because this is your truth. This is who you are. And the truth vibrates at the highest level. And for me, that's really important to touch the truth.
Well, and one of the things that you talk about with social media currency or social currency is the importance of establishing trust. We noticed that you've got an Instagram following over 100,000. It's about 130,000 now. And so how do you do that when so many people, I think, are cynical and distrustful in our world today? And there's so many reasons why that is. How do you establish that trust? Because I do agree it's your social currency, and adding value may be one piece of that, but how do you display to others that they can trust you?
It's consistency of message. I say the same things over and over and over again because it's my truth. It's my truth. And I say it over and over again. And I literally have people that shoot me deals and they're like, we've been listening to you for a year. They don't comment. And then all of a sudden deals show up to my Instagram because I was finally able to get their trust. And it's not rocket science. Like, you just tell the truth and be a good person. This is your digital reputation. That's it. If your reputation is good and you're a good person, I highly suggest this. It's very important. And I'm consistent with it. I'm very consistent with my message every day across all platforms. It's always the same. But I also tell people, if you're shady and you're a shady person and you have ill intentions, do not do this because you'll get exposed for all those things that you're not.
All right, final question. It's the question I love to end with every episode. So Andy Dane Carter, this is the advice you wish you knew when you were 22. Let's go back to that time where you're the sommelier and you're maybe grinding away. And you talked about this a little bit in your early 20s, but I like the idea that, hey, we've learned from experience. These are learning experiences, course corrections. So this concept of Dear Younger Me, it's a song that I really like to listen to that came out a little while ago. And it's that advice you wish you knew when you were 22. If you could take the younger version of yourself aside, or maybe if you're mentoring someone, what's that one piece of advice that you would impart to someone that's younger that may be listening today, and or something that you just learned as a war story on your path to success?
Sure. So I talk a lot about that. It's not about the money and it's not about the commas and zeros. True, but making money is also unbelievable and very awesome. So the one thing is, there was this duplex in Sunset Beach, California that I had the opportunity to buy when I was 23 years old, and it was $260,000. And at the time I was living in Seal Beach, California, and my rent was like $700 or $800. Well, the mortgage was going to be like $1,600. So I didn't want my rent to double because I wanted to party and go out, and you're young, and that's where my head was at. I was working really hard, but that seemed like way too much for me. And I could have paid it with my eyes closed. I was making plenty of money. That duplex just sold I think probably like a year ago for 1.7. So I would go back and tell myself, you're going to do that because it's going to set you up to have 1.5 in liquid cash when you turn 40, smart guy.
Well, I love old adages and I love pithy sayings, and one of them is buy real estate and wait. And that's one of the things I talk to a lot of people when they're like, oh, when's the next correction going to happen? We've been in this expansion cycle for 6 years, and I talk to real estate investors every single day at showings and on the phone, and they're like, the next correction is going to happen, the next softening in the market. And yes, we will have market cycles, but by and large, over time, God ain't making any more real estate, at least here on this earth. And so if you can buy real estate and if you can do it conservatively, I'm a big believer in conservative, don't get over leveraged, don't do things crazy, and don't do real estate in areas that you don't know what is going on, because real estate's hyper local. And so, but I love that advice, that invest in more real estate. And you've clearly learned that over time as you've become a real estate investor. Well, I appreciate all of your time. This has been a fantastic discussion. How can people find you on social media and other platforms? What's the best way to find Andy Dane Carter?
Sure. So I'm Very easy to find. It's just my name, ANDYDANECARTER, Andy Dane Carter on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, YouTube. There's all kinds of content on my YouTube channel that's called hashtag Unlock Now with Andy Dane Carter. I do all kinds of stuff there. It's all free in real estate. If you guys go to my website right now, which is my name as well, andydanecarter.com, you can get a copy of my new book, The 100 Doors, which is free there right now if you guys want to get a copy of that. And I'm really easy to find. So you can just type me into Google and I'll be all over the place.
I love it. Andy, thank you for your time. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for sharing. I learn alongside our podcast audience. And one of the things that I have observed is that, people that have good social currency have people following them, rating them, reviewing them. As I looked at your Bulletproof Real Estate podcast, you've got over 70 reviews on iTunes. We talked about the Instagram account that's 130,000 and growing. And that doesn't happen without people knowing that you're authentic. So I appreciate you bringing your authentic self. We prep for these interviews and Andy told me, he said, hey, let's just roll because all I give is the truth. That's all I do is dispense the truth. And I know that people have learned alongside of me and I've learned a bunch today. So I really appreciate it. Thank you for your time and your wisdom.
Absolutely, brother.
All right. So for Andy Dane Carter, I'm Kyle Malnati. This is the Calibrate Real Estate Podcast. We'd be honored to have a 5-star review on Apple iTunes. And if you'd subscribe to us or Andy Dane Carter on YouTube and or iTunes, we would love that. And for my guests, I always love to say, we will see you around the neighborhood. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.